Do you want to know how it began? How a species that had barely left its own solar system became the most feared military force across 7 galactic arms? Sit down. This story will take a while, and I assure you, by the end, you will never see those bipedal creatures the same way again. My name is Zetheran, Galactic Archivist of Class 9, and I was there. Not at the very first contact itself, but I arrived soon after. I saw the reports, I read the raw data, I spoke to the survivors. And over the last 47 cycles, I have witnessed the meteoric rise of humans from a pre-stellar civilization to what they are now. It all started when the Galactic Consortium detected primitive radio signals coming from an insignificant system we catalogued as Sol 3, disorganized electromagnetic waves, entertainment broadcasts, unencrypted military communications. It was pathetic, really, just another young species playing with technology they barely understood. The first contact ship was commanded by Krikstal, a seasoned Zephyrian who had completed 230 contact missions. A routine mission, we thought. Catalogue another pre-stellar species, assess their technological level, perhaps leave a monitoring beacon. Standard protocols for Class 0.7 civilizations on the Kardashev scale. But when we arrived, when we actually looked at them, everything changed. The xenosociology team began the standard cultural analysis. You must understand, when the consortium evaluates a new species, we look for patterns, social structures, technological progression, basic tribal behavior. We had done this with 847 species before. We thought we had seen it all. Humans broke every one of our models. Let me explain what we found. This species had something we immediately classified as continuous military history. Do you understand what that means? Most species go through predictable phases: tribal era, planetary consolidation, age of reason, space expansion. Organized violence usually ends by the second or third phase. It's inefficient. It's illogical to keep waging large-scale conflicts when planetary resources are available. Humans, they never stopped waging war. Never. We found records of conflicts that lasted centuries. The 100 Years' War, which ironically lasted 116 years. Let that sink into your minds. Entire generations of humans were born, lived and died in a state of war. Grandparents told their grandchildren about the war. Those grandchildren grew old and told their grandchildren about the same war. And when that war finally ended, do you know what they did? They started another and another and another. But it wasn't just the frequency of conflicts. It was the scale, the intensity, the grim creativity. We found a data archive on something they called the First World War. At first we were confused. First World War. That implied subsequent global wars. What kind of species has multiple planetary wars? What kind of species numbers its global wars? Then we read the figures. 20 million dead. In 4 years. With technology, we would consider primitive. Trenches dug into the ground. Chemical weapons. Machine guns. They slaughtered each other by the thousands just to gain a few meters of muddy land. Our chief analyst, Immerse, a crystalline with more than 300 cycles of experience, suffered a complete mental breakdown after reading the details of the Battle of the Somme. 60,000 human casualties on the first day. The first day. We had to replace her and send the entire team to psychological treatment. But here is what truly terrified us. Humans did not learn to stop making wars. They learned to make better wars. 21 years after the First World War, they started the second, and this one killed between 70 and 85 million people. They developed weapons that could instantly destroy entire cities, and they used them twice on civilians. When we presented this data to the Consortium Council, some proposed immediate quarantine of the system. Preventive extermination was even mentioned by more extreme members. A species so violent, so efficient at self-destruction, would surely annihilate itself before reaching the stars, they argued. They were wrong. Terribly wrong. Because here's what we didn't understand at the time. Humans do not wage war in spite of their intelligence. They wage war through their intelligence. They systematized violence in ways no other species had ever conceived. You see, every species we've encountered has soldiers. Every species has conflicts. But humans have military doctrine. It's not just rules of engagement. Every civilized species has those. It is an entire philosophy of how to wage war at every possible level. Operational, strategic, tactical, logistical, they thought of everything, and they documented everything. We found an ancient text written 2,500 Earth years ago by a human general named Sun Tzu. The title, The Art of War. And do you know what he wrote? The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Think about that. 25 centuries before reaching the stars, humans had already understood that war is not just about destruction. It's about breaking the opponent's will. It's about making the enemy surrender before the battle even begins. It's about psychology, logistics, information, morale. And here's the terrifying part. That knowledge wasn't lost in ancient archives. Humans study it actively, continuously, religiously. They have entire institutions dedicated solely to the study of war. Military academies that have existed for centuries. West Point, founded in 1802. Sandhurst, 1741. Saint-Cyr, 1802. The Frunze Academy. Each with its own philosophies, but all built on millennia of accumulated knowledge. And do you know what else we discovered? They teach their children about this. Not as mere historical curiosity, but as applicable lessons. Human children at 10 years old know about Hannibal crossing the Alps with war elephants, executing one of the boldest flanking maneuvers in military history. They know Alexander the Great, who conquered half the known world before the age of 33 through sheer tactical superiority and willpower. They know Genghis Khan, who created the largest contiguous empire in history using superior intelligence, extreme mobility, and devastating psychological warfare. These are not just stories to humans. They are case studies, they are examples, they are inspiration. When we finally established official contact, the consortium sent a diplomatic delegation. Standard protocol, demonstration of technological superiority, offers of trade exchange, veiled threats of consequences if they violated galactic laws. The meeting took place on an orbital station the humans called the ISS. Primitive, but functional. The human representatives arrived in formal attire, smiling, polite. They spoke in diplomatic terms about mutual cooperation and shared benefits. But I was watching their eyes. Oh, their eyes. Humans have this peculiar trait. Their eyes are incredibly expressive. And while their mouths spoke pleasant words, their eyes were doing something completely different. They were measuring, evaluating, cataloging weaknesses. I saw one of the humans, I believe a military officer disguised as a diplomat, studying the ceremonial armor of our honor guard. Not with admiration, with cold analysis. I could almost hear his thoughts. Joints there, weak point here, exposed sensor, limited mobility. And then came the incident that changed everything. One of the consortium members, a foolish young Zentari, decided to make a show of force. He tried to intimidate the humans with holographic projections of consortium battle fleets, thousands of ships, weapons capable of vitrifying continents, the standard arsenal of a Type II civilization. The humans observed politely. They asked technical questions about payload capacity, faster than light speed, weapons systems. They seemed impressed. Then one of them, an older human, gray-haired with a calm smile, said something I will never forget. Impressive. But tell me one thing, how many of those ships are you willing to lose? total silence. Because you see, he continued, still wearing that calm smile, it doesn't matter how superior your technology is. It doesn't matter how many ships you have. What matters is how many you are willing to sacrifice. And we, he paused, looking directly at each of us. We sacrificed 60 million of our own in a single war, and we survived, and we rebuilt, and we grew stronger. The silence deepened. So, my new friends, he concluded, welcome to Earth. We look forward to a long and mutually beneficial partnership. But understand this, underestimating humanity is the last mistake anyone ever makes. It wasn't a threat, it was just facts, presented with that characteristic human politeness. But everyone in the room understood the real message. The consortium delegation returned in silence. The report we sent back triggered furious debates. What do we do with a species like this? Primitive in technology, but advanced in something we didn't even have a name for. Organized violence, martial art, warrior culture. We decided to watch and wait, establish limited trade relations, monitor their development, and above all, never give them a reason for direct conflict. That decision saved us, because 5 years later, a species that clearly hadn't received the memo attacked a human trade outpost in the asteroid belt. The Kralix, a predatory race that had conquered 3 systems through intimidation tactics and brute force. They saw humans as easy prey, a young species barely out of their planetary cradle playing with space mining. The Kralix had energy shields, plasma weapons, faster ships. The first battle lasted 17 minutes. The Kralix destroyed 3 human mining ships and killed 241 people. Then, confident in their superiority, they broadcast demands for total surrender. The human response arrived 72 hours later. It wasn't words, it was action. Let me describe what happened, because you must understand, humans didn't have superior technology. They didn't have energy shields. Their weapons were primitive in comparison. But do you know what they did have? 3,500 years of documented experience in killing efficiently. The first thing they did was intelligence analysis. The Kralix, in their arrogance, didn't realize that every scan of their ships, every transmission, every maneuver was being recorded, analyzed, catalogued by human computers. In 72 hours, humans knew the Kralix's capabilities, limitations, and tactical patterns better than the Kralix themselves. The second thing was logistics. Humans didn't have a real space navy, but they had thousands of civilian ships, miners, cargo haulers, even tourist vessels. And in 72 hours, they converted 234 of those ships into improvised war platforms. The third thing was doctrine. Humans didn't try to fight the Kralix's way. They didn't attempt direct ship-to-ship combat where they were at a technological disadvantage. Instead, they applied something they called asymmetric warfare. When the Kralix fleet returned, confident, they found what looked like a flotilla of civilian ships fleeing in panic. The Kralix pursued, perfect formation, following every logical military doctrine, straight into an improvised minefield made of converted mining charges. The explosion destroyed 40% of the Kralix fleet instantly, but the humans didn't stop there. As the Kralix reeled from the shock, swarms of small craft, cargo shuttles, escape pods, anything humans could strap an engine onto, emerged from the asteroids. They didn't try to penetrate the shields. Instead, they rammed into them. Energy shields require power, and every impact drains that power. Humans simply overloaded them. Raw kinetic force, basic physics applied with calculated precision. When the shields fell, the converted mining ships opened fire, not with sophisticated energy weapons, with mass drivers. Essentially, giant cannons firing chunks of rock at relativistic speeds. Primitive, yes. Effective, absolutely devastating. The battle ended in 43 minutes. Every Kralix ship was destroyed or captured. And then the humans did something that froze the blood of every species that watched the recordings. They analyzed the wreckage, studied the Kralix technology, and within 6 months they had not only replicated the energy shields and plasma weapons, but improved them. Because humans have this terrifying ability, they don't see superior technology as intimidation, but as a challenge, as an opportunity. There are thousands of historical examples of this. When they first saw firearms in medieval Europe, within decades they were producing better versions. When they first saw airplanes, within years they were building supersonic fighters. When they entered the nuclear age, they went from their first fission bomb to the hydrogen bomb in less than a decade. They don't just copy, they improve, obsessively. The Kralix incident sent shockwaves through the galactic community. The consortium held emergency sessions. How had such a young species defeated an established warrior race? That's when they consulted me, as archivist, for a deep analysis of human military culture. And what I discovered in the depths of their historical data changed my understanding of everything. You see, most species developed war out of necessity, competition for resources, territorial disputes. Humans turned war into science. I found something called the principles of war. Different human cultures had different versions, but they all converged on fundamental concepts. Let me explain some that I discovered were universal among human militaries. Objective. Every military operation must have a clearly defined goal. Sounds obvious, right? But how many species actually apply this? Humans plan every move with a specific purpose. Offensive. Maintain initiative, dictate the tempo, force the enemy to react instead of act. Humans understand that pure defense never wins wars. Mass. Concentrate combat power at the decisive place and time. Don't spread resources thin. Strike weak points with overwhelming local superiority. Economy of force. Allocate minimum combat power to secondary efforts. Every resource optimized, nothing wasted. Maneuver. Place the enemy at a disadvantage through movement and positioning, not just brute force, but position. Unity of command. Clear command structure. No confusion. No conflicting orders. Absolute hierarchy in combat. Security. Never allow the enemy to gain an unexpected advantage. Always protect information, always keep reserves. Surprise, strike when and where the enemy does not expect, because even superior enemies can be defeated if caught unprepared. Simplicity, clear, simple plans minimize misunderstandings. Complexity is the enemy of execution. These principles were refined through thousands of years of conflict, tested in millions of battles. Validated with blood. And here's the terrifying part. These are just the basics, the fundamentals every human soldier learns. The military equivalent of learning to read and write. The real depth begins when you examine specific doctrines. Blitzkrieg, literally lightning war in an ancient human language. Concentration of armored and air forces in rapid, deep penetrations, isolating and destroying enemy formations through speed and shock. Developed by the Germans, perfected by the Soviets, studied by everyone. Defense in depth, multiple layers of resistance that bleed enemy attacks dry. Every defensive line connected, every retreat planned, every counterattack coordinated. The attacker advances but bleeds for every meter. Maneuver warfare. Do not attack enemy strength directly. Attack command systems, logistics, morale. Break the enemy's ability to fight coherently. Win before the enemy even realizes they're losing. Counterinsurgency. How to fight enemies who don't present conventional targets. Win hearts and minds. Separate insurgents from the population. Humans have written libraries on this, but theory is only part of the equation. Humans also understand that war is about people, and people need motivation. I discovered that humans have concepts like esprit de corps, the feeling of pride and loyalty to a specific military unit. They cultivate this deliberately. traditions, symbols, rituals, shared history. A human soldier doesn't just fight for abstract concepts like homeland or duty. He fights for the men and women beside him, for the honor of his unit, to not let down those who came before. And that motivation makes humans individually dangerous in ways other species rarely achieve. Let me tell you about something I discovered called the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration of the United States of America, one of humanity's nations. Do you know what it takes to receive it? Acts of valor beyond the call of duty, facing certain death, extreme sacrifice. And do you know how many have been awarded? More than 3,500 throughout American history. 3,500 times, humans did things other species would consider irrational, suicidal, impossible. And they weren't exceptions. They were common enough to warrant a specific medal. Read some of the citations. Soldiers throwing themselves onto grenades to shield comrades. Pilots flying suicide missions to save their teams. Combat medics running under heavy fire to rescue the wounded. Repeatedly. Consistently. What kind of species cultivates that behavior? What kind of culture celebrates self-sacrificial acts? And then I understood. It isn't self-destructive to them. It's tactical. A human sacrificing himself to save 10 others isn't being irrational. He's making a cold military calculation. 1 for 10 is an acceptable trade. And if those 10 survivors fight more effectively because they witnessed such sacrifice, the force multiplier is exponential. Humans turned even their emotions into weapons. But don't think humans are only brute force and sacrifice. They also mastered the art of subtlety. I found records of something called the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, precursor to the American CIA. During their Second World War, they developed a sabotage manual, but not obvious sabotage. Subtle sabotage, instructions for workers in occupied territory on how to slow production without being obvious. Accidentally misunderstanding orders, losing important paperwork, introducing small defects into equipment, holding unnecessary meetings to waste time. They turned bureaucratic inefficiency into a weapon. And psychological operations, humans are masters. During the Second World War, they dropped leaflets over enemy troops, not threats. Pictures of beautiful women with messages like, "While you're here, she's with another man back home," corroding morale through seeds of doubt. In the Cold War, a decades-long conflict between human superpowers that never turned into open war, they used culture as a weapon. Music, movies, genes, Coca-Cola. They exported a lifestyle so attractive that rival empires collapsed from within. War doesn't need to be kinetic. That's another human lesson. But let's return to the present. After the Kralix incident, the consortium could no longer ignore the humans. Formal relations were established, treaties were signed, and slowly, cautiously, technology began to be shared. Humans absorbed it all like sponges. In 10 years, human ships were as advanced as anything in the consortium. In 15, they were competing in galactic markets. In 20, they were establishing colonies in 3 neighboring systems, and their military forces, they grew exponentially. But here's what's fascinating. Humans didn't just adopt galactic technology, they fused it with their traditional doctrines. Energy weapons? Great. But they also kept mass drivers, because sometimes a chunk of metal at relativistic speeds is exactly the right tool. Energy shields? Excellent. But they also developed heavy ablative armor, because redundancy is survival. Faster than light navigation? Revolutionary. But they also kept chemical engines as backup, because reliability beats sophistication when lives are on the line. Humans never discard tools that work. They accumulate. Every generation of technology is preserved, studied, kept as an option. It's unsettling, actually. Visiting a human military base is like walking through a war museum that's still operational. Side by side, you can see 300-year-old chemical propellant rifles and state-of-the-art plasma rifles, both in active use. Any tool can be useful in the right context, a human officer once explained to me. Why would we limit our options? And then came the Tharkian War. The Tharkians they are technically, the survivors still exist, an ancient warrior species. 5,000 years of civilized history, an empire spanning 42 systems, cutting-edge military technology, martial traditions stretching back millennia. They looked at the humans, 70 years in space, 30 colonized systems, and saw arrogant upstarts, dangerous expansionists who needed to be contained. They tried diplomacy first, I'll give them credit, territorial demands, ultimatums, escalating threats. The humans negotiated patiently, offered concessions, proposed treaties. The Tharkians interpreted this as weakness, big mistake. Because while negotiating, the humans were doing what they do best, planning, analyzing, preparing. When the first Tharkian ship crossed the line and destroyed a human mining station, the response wasn't immediate. It wasn't emotional, it was surgical. Within 6 hours, every Tharkian communication system in the sector was hacked or destroyed. Within 12, major fuel depots were sabotaged. Within 18, 3 human fleets emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation around Tharkian positions. And then the humans did something no species had ever attempted in modern galactic warfare. They offered terms of surrender before the first large-scale exchange of fire. "Withdraw now," the transmission said, "and this ends here. Proceed, and we will assume you desire total war. Choose wisely." The Tharkians, proud, refused. In the next 72 hours, humans systematically dismantled 3 centuries of Tharkian military supremacy. Not through brute force, through precision, information superiority, multi-domain coordination. While Tharkian fleets engaged human forces in conventional naval battles, which the Tharkians believed they were winning, human special operations teams were infiltrating command facilities. Human hackers were penetrating military networks. Long-range missile strikes were destroying logistical depots. The Tharkians were winning battles, but the humans were winning the war. And then the humans revealed their most devastating weapon, propaganda. Transmissions began appearing on every Tharkian channel. Not threats, not promises of destruction, just questions. "Why are you dying?" the messages asked. "Your leaders started this war. You didn't vote for it. Your children didn't ask for it. And yet you bleed for decisions you never made," accompanied by images, destroyed Tharkian ships, casualties, grieving families, and critically, statistics, cold, hard numbers about human production capacity. How many ships they could build per month, how many soldiers they could train, how many missiles they could manufacture. The message was clear: you can hurt us, but you cannot defeat us. And how long are you willing to bleed before you realize it? Moral corrosion on an industrial scale. In 2 months, mutinies broke out in Tharkian bases. In 3, peace factions emerged in their government. In 4, a military coup removed the hardline leadership. The war ended not with formal surrender, but with internal collapse. And the humans, they offered generous terms, reconstruction aid, trade agreements, even technical assistance. "We don't want a permanent enemy," the human negotiator declared. "We want a partner. Calculated, strategic, visionary. Because humans understand something fundamental. The best victory is the one that turns enemies into allies." Today, 30 years after the Tharkian War, human-Tharkian relations are close. Commercial cooperation, cultural exchange, even joint military exercises. The Tharkians were not conquered, they were absorbed, integrated, transformed from threat into asset. It's terrifying and brilliant at the same time. And that brings us to the present. to the rumors, to the questions everyone asks but few dare to answer. What would happen if the entire galaxy united against the humans? Mathematically, we should win. We are thousands of species, tens of thousands of systems, combined resources that make all human production look insignificant. But I have studied humans for decades, and I can say with certainty, we would not win. Not because humans are stronger, not because they are more advanced, but because they are more dedicated. See, every other species views war as a means to an end. Achieve a specific objective. When the cost exceeds the benefit, we stop. It's logical, it's rational. Humans, they have this concept called total war. When truly threatened, when their survival is on the line, they don't calculate cost-benefit. They simply keep going. During their Second World War, the Soviet Union, one of humanity's nations, lost 27 million citizens, nearly 15% of its total population. Entire cities were destroyed. Industrial production was devastated. Did they surrender? No. They moved entire factories beyond the Ural Mountains. Women and children worked 16-hour shifts producing weapons, and they kept fighting, and they won. That ability to absorb catastrophic punishment and simply continue is unique in the galaxy. But let me tell you something I discovered recently, something that keeps galactic military strategists awake at night. Humans have contingencies. For everything, I discovered classified files, don't ask how, about something called continuity of government plans. In the event of total nuclear war, humans have protocols to ensure command structures survive. Deep bunkers, redundant communications, chains of succession dozens of levels deep. They planned for scenarios where 90% of their population dies. And the plans are not about surrender, they're about rebuilding and counterattack. What kind of species plans for near extinction and still thinks in terms of eventual victory? And here's what truly scares me. Genetically, biologically, humans are apex predators of their homeworld. Binocular vision for tracking prey, incredible endurance. They can literally run prey to exhaustion, hands capable of manipulating tools with precision. But the real terror isn't the hardware. It's the software. The human mind. Humans have something their psychologists call divergent thinking, and the ability to see multiple solutions to any problem. Creativity applied to complex challenges. In war, this manifests as terrifying adaptability. During the Tharkian War, there was an incident that illustrates this perfectly. A small human force, just 30 soldiers, was isolated on an asteroid. No resupply, no reinforcements, surrounded by 200 Tharkians. Conventional military protocol, defend to the last, fight to the death, perhaps negotiate honorable surrender. Do you know what the humans did? They hacked the asteroid's life support system, reduced atmospheric pressure by 60%. Humans, being adaptable, adjusted. They used supplemental oxygen tanks, modified their suits. The Tharkians, their biology required specific atmospheric density. They began suffering hypoxia, became disoriented, sluggish. Within 48 hours, the 30 humans had captured all 200 Tharkians without firing a single shot. When the Tharkian commander was rescued, he was furious. "This is cheating," he protested. "This is not how war is supposed to be fought." The human commander just smiled. War doesn't have rules about how it must be fought, only rules about how it must not, and we followed them all. You're alive, after all. That cognitive flexibility, that refusal to accept conventional limitations makes humans unpredictable, and unpredictability is a massive tactical advantage. But don't think humans are only chaotic improvisers. They also master meticulous planning. I discovered something called war games. Humans simulate future conflicts, constantly, obsessively. They have entire military facilities dedicated to this. Computers run millions of simulations. Officers role-play opposing forces. Every possible scenario is explored. Alien invasion? They have plans. Government collapse? Plans. Zombie apocalypse? Yes, they literally have plans for that too, originally as a training exercise, but the plans exist. And here's the disturbing part. Those plans are constantly updated, refined, tested. When humans entered the galactic arena, do you think they did so unprepared? Within 5 years, they had simulated conflicts with all 23 militarized species in the consortium, identified vulnerabilities, developed counter-strategies. When the Tharkian War began, humans had already simulated that specific conflict 47 times. They knew exactly what to do. It wasn't luck. It was preparation meeting opportunity. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of human warfare is something subtler, something that took me years to truly grasp. Humans have this phrase, winning hearts and minds. Most species interpret this as simple propaganda, public relations, but for humans, it is far deeper. During their counterinsurgency conflicts, wars against enemies with no defined territory, no uniforms, blending with civilians, they developed entire doctrines around it. It's not enough to destroy the enemy militarily. You must make the local population your ally. You must make them want you to win. How? Construction projects, medical aid, education, protection from criminal elements, respect for local culture, and simultaneously, intelligence operations identifying insurgents, special operations eliminating leaders, information warfare undermining enemy narratives. It is the conduct of war in multiple simultaneous dimensions, kinetic and non-kinetic, military and civilian, physical and psychological. Most species lack the mental capacity to manage such complexity. Humans make it standard operating procedure, and it works. After the Tharkian War, Tharkian civilian populations in contested territories often asked for human protection, because humans treated civilians better than their own military government. That's not just tactical victory, that's generational strategic victory, because now you have an entire generation of Tharkians who see humans positively, who admire human culture, who want to emulate humans. Cultural conquest without firing a single additional shot. Let me tell you about the Human Military Exchange Program. 50 years ago, humans offered military training to any species interested. Knowledge sharing, technical assistance, joint exercises. It looked generous, trust-building, diplomacy. But look at the result. Today, 78 different species have military officers trained by humans, using human doctrines, following human principles of war. When conflicts arise, these species think like humans, plan like humans, fight like humans. Humans didn't just spread their military influence, they spread their military philosophy. And here's the brilliant part. If conflict arises between humans and any of these species, humans already know exactly how they will fight, because they trained them. It's dimensional chess that other species have barely begun to comprehend. But perhaps I'm painting humans as cold, calculating, emotionless war machines. That would be incorrect. Humans feel deeply, perhaps too deeply. They have this concept called brothers in arms. Soldiers who fought together develop bonds that transcend biological family. They trust each other with their lives, sacrifice for each other without hesitation. And when they lose someone, the pain is real. Deep, lasting. I once visited a human memorial, the tomb of the unknown soldier in Arlington on Earth. Guards watch it 24 hours a day, relieved every hour with precise ceremony. I asked the guide, "Who is buried here?" "We don't know," he replied. "A soldier from the First World War, identity lost, could be anyone." "Then why the constant guard? Why the honor?" He looked at me as if I had asked the most foolish question possible. because he gave everything. And as long as we don't know who he was, we treat him as the hero every family lost and never found. I understood then, humans don't just use emotion tactically. They feel it genuinely. Honor is real, sacrifice is real, loyalty is real, and that makes them more dangerous, not less. Because you can defeat an enemy motivated by gain, offer more, negotiate. You can defeat an enemy motivated by ideology, discredit the ideology. But how do you defeat an enemy motivated by love, by loyalty to comrades at their side, by memory of those who fell before? You can't. You can only respect them and hope they are your allies, not your enemies. There was a recent incident that illustrates the human duality perfectly. A Velthani research ship suffered a catastrophic systems failure near an active war zone. 16 scientists aboard, no maneuvering capability, no long-range communications. They were in contested space, technically a neutral zone, but with heavy military presence from 3 different factions, including humans. The humans detected the emergency signal first. Military protocols would say, investigate cautiously, could be a trap, could be a disguise. Prioritize the safety of your own forces. Do you know what the humans did? They diverted an entire destroyer, a warship, not a rescue vessel, at maximum speed, arrived in 40 minutes, ignored potential threats, focused solely on the rescue. They managed to rescue all 16 Velthani. No questions, no demands, no expectation of compensation. When the Velthani captain asked why they risked a military ship and crew for alien civilians, the human commander simply said, because it was the right thing to do. Just like that. No tactical calculation, no strategic advantage, just basic morality. But here's the strategically brilliant part. That single action generated more Velthani goodwill than decades of diplomacy ever could. Today, the Velthani are firm human allies. The humans made the ethically right choice, and coincidentally, or not so coincidentally, it was also the strategically right choice. This is warfare mastery at a level other species aspire to, but rarely achieve, where morality and effectiveness align perfectly. But don't misunderstand me. Humans can be brutal when necessary. During the Proxima Rebellion, a human colony decided to secede. Urban guerrilla warfare, terrorist tactics, civilians used as shields. The human response was educational. First, total isolation, complete space blockade, nothing in or out. Second, infiltration. Special operations identifying rebel leadership, not through brutal interrogations, through sophisticated signals intelligence, surveillance, pattern analysis. Third, psychological operations, not crude propaganda, but highlighting divisions within the rebel movement, amplifying moderate voices, demonstrating the futility of continued resistance. Fourth, shows of force. Surgical precision strikes against military infrastructure, 0 civilian casualties. Clear message, we can reach you whenever we want, we're choosing restraint. And finally, when rebel leadership was isolated and discredited, they offered amnesty to followers, fair trials for leaders. The rebellion collapsed in 4 months, minimal casualties, colony reintegrated, legitimate grievances addressed through reforms, efficient, methodical, relentless, but not cruel. It's this combination that makes humans unique. They can be compassionate, they can be brutal, and they decide which to be based on a cold analysis of which best serves their objectives. It's not blind emotion, it's not cold logic, it's the synthesis of both. Recently, I attended a symposium on galactic military strategy. Topic: preparing for emerging threats. Everyone knew what we were really discussing. What if humans become the threat? Strategists from 20 species presented analyses, assessments of human capabilities, simulations of hypothetical conflicts, containment strategies. And every presentation reached the same uncomfortable conclusion. We have no satisfactory answer. Technologically, we can match humans. Numerically, we vastly outnumber them. But in terms of willpower, adaptability, strategic thinking, we are outmatched. One of the presenters, an old Tharkian general, ironically a veteran of the war against humans, summed it up perfectly. You can plan for an enemy superior in technology. You develop countermeasures. You can plan for an enemy superior in numbers. You concentrate force, use terrain, exploit logistics. But how do you plan for an enemy superior in will? How do you fight a species that simply does not stop? That absorbs losses that would break any other civilization and keeps advancing? You can't. You can only ensure you never become their enemy. Total silence followed his words, because everyone in the room knew he was right. There are rumors, not confirmed, mind you, but persistent, that the Central Consortium has emergency protocols related to humans, not war plans, containment plans. If humans ever posed an existential threat, they wouldn't try to defeat them militarily. They'd try to isolate them, quarantine them in their current systems, deny them expansion resources, essentially an admission that direct confrontation would be problematic. And do you know the most ironic part? Humans have probably already identified these plans, developed countermeasures, have their own contingencies, because that's what they do, constantly, obsessively. But here's what keeps me optimistic about the galactic human future. Humans do not want to be the galaxy's enemy. Look at their history. Yes, full of wars, but also full of cooperation, trade, cultural exchange, alliances. The same human nations that fought devastating world wars? Today, they're close trade partners, military allies, friends. Germany and France fought 3 major wars in 70 years. Today, their militaries train together, their economies are integrated, their populations travel freely across borders. This ability to turn enemies into allies, to leave the past in the past while learning from it, is possibly humanity's greatest strategic strength. Because it means every conflict does not weaken them in the long run. It strengthens them, adds more allies, expands influence. It's growth through war followed by generous peace. And they have applied that same philosophy on a galactic scale. Every species that fought humans and survived today has positive relations with them, trade, cooperation, even friendship. The Kraliks, who started the first human conflict. Today, their young study at human universities, learn human engineering, bring that knowledge back home. The Tharkians, joint military exercises are annual now, officer exchanges, collaboration on defense projects, even species that never fought humans but were viewed with suspicion. The humans worked patiently to build trust, mutually beneficial trade, joint scientific projects, cultural exchange. It is long-term strategy that few species have the patience to execute. But humans think in generations, not cycles. They plan for centuries, not decades. I visited Earth again recently, first time in 20 years. The changes were impressive. Cities that were once industrial centers had transformed into cultural hubs, museums, educational centers, memorial parks. I spoke with ordinary humans, not military, not diplomats, just citizens. And consistently I found the same attitude: curiosity about other species, a desire to learn, a willingness to cooperate. Yes, there was still caution. There were still those who viewed other species with suspicion. But the majority were optimistic about a galactic future. A young human, xenobiology student, told me something that stayed with me. My grandmother was born before first contact. She tells me how frightening it was, knowing we weren't alone, but also exciting. And today, I have friends from 5 different species. I study life forms my grandmother never imagined existed. And I hope to work on a joint research project after graduation. The universe is big. It would be a waste to spend time fighting when there's so much to discover together. Simple wisdom, but profound, and increasingly, it is this perspective that is shaping human policy. Their military establishment, still paranoid, still planning for every conceivable conflict, still training intensely, but their civilian population, more and more integrated into the galactic community. And in human democratic systems, which are the majority, it is the civilian population that ultimately determines policy. That doesn't mean humans have grown weak, far from it, but it does mean their warrior mindset is being channeled differently. Not how do we defeat them, but how do we protect ourselves while cooperating. Not how do we conquer territory, but how do we expand influence through soft power. Not how do we destroy enemies, but how do we turn enemies into allies. It is evolution, not abandonment of martial traditions, and perhaps that is what makes them truly gods of war. Not because they are better at fighting, but because they are better at knowing when to fight. Sun Tzu wrote, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." It took humans 2,500 years, but they have finally truly understood that lesson, and now they are applying it on a galactic scale. So back to the original question, how did humanity become the most feared warrior species in the galaxy? It wasn't through superior technology. Other species match them. It wasn't through numbers. Other species vastly exceed them. It was through incomparable dedication to the art of war, through thousands of years refining every aspect of conflict, through obsessively documenting every lesson learned in blood. But more importantly, it was through understanding that true mastery of war means knowing when not to wage it. The gods of war are not those who fight the most. They are those who win without fighting when possible, fight when necessary with devastating efficiency, and turn victories into lasting alliances. That is mastery other species study but rarely achieve. And that is why, when young military officers of newly contacted species come to me for advice on how to understand modern war, I always give the same answer. Study the humans, read their history, analyze their doctrines, train with their instructors. But above all, never ever underestimate them, because they have turned war into science, art, and philosophy simultaneously. And if you ever face them in conflict, remember, you are not just fighting human soldiers. You are fighting against 3,500 years of refined experience. You are fighting against a culture that celebrates warriors but venerates peacemakers. You are fighting against a species that can absorb catastrophic punishment and simply keep going. And most frightening of all, you are fighting an enemy that would prefer not to fight, but is extremely good at it when necessary. Usually, after that advice, they ask, "So how do we win?" And I answer honestly, you don't. You negotiate, you cooperate, you become allies, because the only thing more dangerous than a human enemy is wasting the opportunity to have a human ally. And with that, my story ends. Humans are not perfect. They have flaws. They make mistakes. Their own histories are full of tragedies they could have avoided, but they learn, they adapt, they improve, and they continue. Always, always continue. That is why they are gods of war. Not because they love violence, but because they have mastered it so completely that they can choose when to unleash it and when to restrain it. And that choice, that control, is true power. End of transmission. Galactic Archivist Zetharan, Standard Cycle 47 post-first contact. Archivist's note, this account will be archived in the Central Galactic Library under classification, Comparative Military History, Case Studies, Humanity. Open access for educational purposes. I especially recommend it for students of military strategy, xenosociology, and interspecies relations, and for any human who may one day read this. Thank you for not being as terrifying as you could be. The galaxy appreciates your restraint, most of the time.